We've talked about Anaconda, who we are, our strategy, and the assets that we have. And now let's turn to the maritime transaction itself. I think it's a pretty compelling transaction for both parties. There's a significant operating rationale to this. You know, we both operate on the Bay Peninsula. What we'll be able to create here is a consolidation of this area. It's an area that has a lot of the geologic features to find more gold. There's two key fault systems running up the east and west side of the peninsula, and all of the historic production, our current production, and a lot of the discoveries all along those areas. We would be consolidating this area. We would have the current production coming out of the Point Rousse project. We'd be developing the Hammerdown mine and trucking that ore back to the Pine Cove mill. And then, of course, we have exploration projects, the Tilt Cove project on the eastern side of the Bay Peninsula. Maritime also has some exploration projects. We're looking at other projects as well in this area. And we'll be able to create a very tight-knit, close geographic system, hub and spoke system, and a long period of time we'll be able to explore, develop projects, and produce in this area. And basically control the whole area. So it's a pretty compelling transaction just from that one standpoint. You know, if we're successful here with the current production out of Point Rousse and then bringing on Hammerdown, you'll be putting about 50 to 60,000 ounces a year through this mill. And that's just basically at the current production rates and grade, and assuming what the pre-feasibility says for the Hammerdown project, right? We believe that we can fast-track this project. You know, of course, all the infrastructure is in place. There's a mill. There's tailings capacity. There's, you know, the mine can be opened up. The permitting we think we can do within 2 years or less. We've gotten favorable response already from the government on being able to fast-track this project. So, you know, we think that that's certainly a reality over the next 2 years or less. Also, we think that we can improve the economics of the project, both on the capital side and on the operating side. Obviously, from an operating perspective, you know, the pre-feasibility study that Maritime put out, they contemplated using the Nugget Pond mill. The Nugget Pond mill is much further than the Pine Cove mill. You actually have to drive past our site in order to get to the Nugget Pond mill. So we would have a transportation advantage there. From a general administrative perspective as well, we're already there in the area. We have our administrative staff at the Point Rousse project, so you wouldn't have to replicate that at a full-scale basis down at Hammerdown. So there's a couple of different operating areas that we can see some improvements. And then, of course, on the capital side, you know, we believe that maybe we can lower the capital, particularly use more of the underground workings and have to do less development. I think one of the key things to understand here too is that one of our vice presidents used to be the general manager of Hammerdown, so we do have an intimate knowledge of the project, and we think that we can use that to maybe not have to do as much development work, knowing sort of what the underground workings look like and how they were closed up. Also, the pre-feasibility study contemplates buying underground mining equipment. We wouldn't do that. We would hire a contract miner. That's been the practice at Anaconda. That's what we use currently at our Point Rousse project for surface mining or open pit mining. So we would hire an underground contract miner. So we would still incur costs, but they would be on an operating basis over time versus having to raise the capital up front. So we'd be able to lower the upfront capital cost. And of course, you know, I think when people look at this transaction, in particular these assets, they're pretty complementary. I think both sides bring a lot to the table. Certainly, Maritime is bringing to the table the Hammerdown project. It's a high-grade project, a significant amount of measured and indicated resources. But don't forget, you know, in order to make this happen, Anaconda is bringing everything else to the table. We're going to have, you know, we've got the 1,300 ton per day mill. We've got the tailings capacity. Of course, we've got operating cash flow currently, so that can help offset cost and financing pressures. We've got a significant amount of measured and indicated resources. We are bringing to the table also a high-grade project in Nova Scotia, being the Goldboro project. And probably most importantly for the immediate area is the experienced management team. We've been operating this area for 10 years. on this current project, our Point Rouge project. We have an intimate knowledge of how to do business in the area. We know the rocks, the geology. We know how to do the permitting. We have the relationships with the government. So there's a whole lot of assets that we bring to the table, and we bring them together with Hammerdown, and we can create a significant operation on the Bay River Peninsula.
Just to segue into what Dusty was talking, we have put together the development plan that would include, of course, hauling all this ore to our existing milling facility at the Pine Cove and using existing tailings for the storage. If we were successful, we're anticipating that we would get a hold of the property in second half of the year. We would proceed first with permitting and community relations. We have established quite good relationships in Bay Verde area where we operate now for 10 years. Also, we would start working on dewatering and rehabilitation of the existing ramp. The existing PFS suggests that this ramp or parts of this ramp would be used for development. If we can rehab and use the entire ramp and change the mine plan, that would see significant impact on the capital cost and would speed up development of the project. To be able to do this, we would start feasibility study as soon as possible. Also, we want to grow this project, so in order to do so, we would start with infill drill program, and prior to starting the program, we would of course have to have a look on the core, check the core sample. At this point, we're looking to drill probably somewhere about 200 holes or about 40,000 meters. All these drilling wouldn't start the day one, of course, so there is some due diligence that we would have to do first. And of course, we would have to finish and close the financing prior to moving with the development. In the first half of the next year, we would see the engineering work continues also on geotechnical and hydrogeology, because there is no existing data as we know it now and as it was publicly announced. We've been looking to finish and complete feasibility study and also bring power to the site. For the rehab work, we may bring limited amount of the power, or we may use generators. At this point, we haven't decided on these details yet. The bigger part of this would be actually hiring an underground contractor. As Dustin mentioned, we don't envision buying equipment, but actually hiring a contractor. And then we would evaluate the need for underground bulk sample. At this point, we think we can use our existing mill as is to process Hammerdown ore. And to prove this, the Hammerdown was in production from 2000 to 2001, and all the ore was processed at the Nugget Pond mill. Also, at its beginning, Anaconda used to process about 80,000 tons of the ore at the Nugget Pond mill. Our current mill does consist of the flotation circuit, crushing, grinding, and leaching. For the Hammerdown ore, we would bypass flotation and use only crushing, grinding, and leaching, and also Merrill-Crowe for gold recovery. So looking and progressing with the engineering and the development, as Dustin mentioned, we've been already having some discussions about the permitting. We want to expedite the permitting and hoping to get all the permits in place by the second half of the year, where we actually would start with site construction, and we would get the underground contractor to start with underground development. Pending all these developments, permits, we're looking to start commercial production somewhere in early 2020.
So let's talk about some of the benefits of this transaction. I think first off, it's important to point out that this type of bid process, that if you want to accept Anaconda's bid, you actually have to tender your shares and actually do that. If you do not tender your shares, then you're effectively voting for the status quo. By tendering to the offer, you're receiving a premium, a 64% premium compared to the 20-day VWAP before the transaction was the bid was announced. The company, the combined entity, the pro forma entity, will have a higher market profile. We're already getting interest from several different financing sources because of the potential here that everybody sees. There's obviously the potential for re-rating. You're talking about a company now that could be on the path to 100,000 ounces a year of production once Goldboro and Hammerdown are in production. We'll be able to accelerate the development of Hammerdown. As we've mentioned before, our mill is ready and available now. Our tailings capacity is available now. Our team is in place now. I think it's important to understand that Nugget Pond, which is the mill that's been contemplated in the pre-feasibility study, isn't available right now. It needs grinding capacity. It needs tailings capacity. So it's not something that can be executed upon immediately like we can when we close this transaction. Also, you're getting a full management team and a board with a high standard of corporate governance. So that's a pretty compelling aspect as well. If you're thinking about not tendering, then essentially you are going to continue or will default to the status quo. In that sense, there's been no meaningful progress made at Maritime over the last couple years. There's been a lot of financings done, but they've been done at successfully lower prices, so they've been down rounds. Nearly half of the money that's been raised over the last roughly 3 years is gone to G&A. It really hasn't gone on the ground to really advance the project. And the plan, I think this is an important part too, the discussion in the director's circular about a plan, they don't really talk about a plan. We have a plan. Gordana has outlined the plan. You just heard about it in the previous slide. We are ready to go, and I think we know the steps that need to be taken, and we've done this many times. Gordana is on to her 5th development project with Goldboro, and then Hammerdown could be the 6th. So we've got everything in place to get started now, which I think is a pretty important part of the value here. Time value of money is important consideration. There are other benefits to the transaction. Obviously, in this transaction, you would be getting Anaconda shares. We trade on the Toronto Stock Exchange and also on the OTCQX in the United States, so we have a greater reach than the TSXV. Certainly, it opens up to more investors and it opens up to more liquidity. Our trading volume has been a lot higher than Maritime. When you look at prior to the announcement of the intention to bid, I believe that our trading volume was probably about 20 times in dollar amount than Maritime. So significant liquidity there relative to what Maritime was trading at. The combined entity will be over $50 million in market cap. We will have more exposure. As I said before, we're already getting more exposure just on the potential of bringing these companies together. Then the analyst coverage we think will come on as well. We currently, Anaconda has 2 analysts covering us, and we believe there'll be a 3rd immediately upon closing. And then, of course, it could expand from there. So there's certainly the ability to get more analyst coverage. Certainly access to capital. As I mentioned, we're already seeing the interest across the equity funds, different types of debt financing, alternative financing, different ways to sort of be able to finance the projects and bring them in at the lowest cost of capital. Of course, we also have our cash flow that's coming out of the Point Roos right now that can help mitigate our financing pressures at certain periods of time. So we're not completely beholden to the capital markets in any particular period. And then, of course, this is a large mineral resource portfolio. When you put together what we've got on our books, our primary projects being Point Roos and Goldboro, and then you bring on Hammerdown and Orion as well, you're looking at over 2 million ounces of gold there. And then, of course, we do have our non-core asset on the Great Northern Project, which has got about 600,000 ounces. So in total, it's a very substantial mineral resource portfolio. It's over multiple projects in 2 provinces. It's got a lot of growth potential. We're demonstrating that at Goldboro. We're certainly seeing it locally at Point Rousse. And I'm sure we believe, and I'm sure the shareholders of Maritime believe, that there's growth potential at the Hammerdown project and the adjacent deposits. Of course, this would also mean for the Maritime shareholders